folks. Hey, welcome back here to KCAA Radio. This is the Real Men of Real Estate radio show, and Patrick Franz, the Note Mentor. I'm your host, of course. And before the break, we were just getting into a little bit about my background, and I ended on that mortgage notes have the three main things investors usually look for in any type of investment. One is security, two is steady yield, and three is monthly cash flow, mailbox money. And of course, when I learned about notes and I compared note investing to all of the other investments I'd ever heard of in my entire life, I obviously thought, boy, this sounds too good to be true. And some people learning about notes for the very first time may think that same thing. Well, wait a minute, this sounds too good to be true. And also I hear, well, if it's so great, how come I've never heard of it? And I may get into that for you folks here in just a second, but let me tell you how possible it is. I learned about notes in 2018, late 2018, and here it is 2022. And, I've amassed a wonderful cash flowing personal portfolio of mine. We've launched the Note Investor University, where we coach students, and we've taught over 600 students how to become professional note investors and add this vehicle to their portfolios. And if you want to look at that, go to noteinvestoruniversity.com and take a look at the programs and things we have to offer so you can learn this and add this to your portfolio. But also now I'm a fund manager. And if you would have talked to me in, say, 2015 or 16 and said, hey, in 2021 and 22, you're going to become a fund manager in the mortgage note investing space, I would have called you crazy. And radio show host, because obviously, folks, you're listening to my radio show that has to do with note investing. And now it has spawned more opportunities, changing your mindset, getting with different types of folks, getting into the money business and getting involved with people that are in the money business, which I consider note investing to be. It spawns other opportunities. And now we're moving on to build apartments in Florida. And again, you would have never thought a guy like me, who was just a sales guy and a telemarketer, would have been able to accomplish these things in just this few short many years. And I'm not saying this to brag, folks, but I really am adamant that people understand with mortgage note investing, you can change your life dramatically within a few short years, young or old. Anybody can just decide to alter their lives for the better financially. And with this investment vehicle, there are ways that you can do this no matter where you're starting from. My partner and my mentor found out about notes when he was about 60 years old and has been able to change his life dramatically over the last 10 years or so. And anybody can do it, folks. Anybody can do it. And that's my message there. But let me give somebody a relation. Maybe again, if this is your first time hearing about mortgage notes, I'm going to give you some sort of analogy so you understand this. If you buy a house with cash, you bring the cash to the table and then you get a deed and the keys. And that's about it. The deal's done. But most folks are not buying houses all cash these days. Most people need to go and get some financing. And so in comes a promissory note. A promissory note simply spells out the terms in which the borrowed money is to be paid back. And so it may have in there the number of months, the interest rate the bank is going to charge you, the monthly payment amount, and when that monthly payment amount is due, and if there's any late payment penalties and those kinds of things will be listed there in that promissory note. It's kind of a written IOU. And with the bank doesn't want to lend money unsecured when there's a physical piece of real estate there. And so they also give what's called a mortgage document that the borrowers fill out. We always fill it out as the borrower. And basically a mortgage document collateralizes or pledges that physical piece of real estate as collateral for the terms of that promissory note. So what you're doing is you're submitting a document to the bank that says, I, the borrower, am pledging my physical house as collateral for the terms of that promissory note, meaning if I don't pay like it says in that promissory note based on the rules that we've described, the bank can take my house, and you're volunteering that. Okay. And so that's what it means when we're note investors, is that we're buying one of those promissory notes. We're literally stepping into the shoes of the bank. We become the bank. And now we're collecting mortgage payments every month from a homeowner rather than collecting rent payments every month from a tenant. And so we don't have to deal with the T's and the phone calls, the toilets, the tenants, the termites, the broken water heaters, and these kinds of things, because the folks in that physical house are homeowners. They're not tenants. You're their bank, or shall we say their lender, their mortgage lender. You're not their landlord. And so, because this sounds so great, and some people listening might be saying exactly what I said when I learned about this. Well, this sounds too good to be true, number one. And number two, if I've never heard of it, then it's got to be some sort of a scam. I mean, how come I've never heard of this? And that's okay. I thought the same exact thing, folks. But let me get into how this all began and how come you've never heard of it until maybe today. I don't know if folks understand, but prior to the 1930s, most folks were not homeowners. Most folks were renters, and only the wealthy and elite owned physical property. And the reason that is because prior to the Great Depression and such, to buy a physical piece of real estate, you had to put 50% down as a deposit. So you had to come up with half of that house's value as a deposit. And they were only giving loan terms extending out to about 5 years. And so imagine if you put yourself in their shoes in today's standards, you'd have to ask yourself, could I go buy myself a house in today's marketplace, put 50% down as a deposit, and then afford how much the monthly mortgage payment would be if they only allowed me to take a 5-year loan? And for most folks, the answer is no. And it was back then as well. But what happened is in 1934, they instituted the National Housing Act, which then spawned FHA. And for those of you that don't understand why that was instituted, it was because they were trying to make homeownership possible for lower and middle income families. And so it was a great thing that they were doing. And the way that they did that, folks, is that they were offering to the public that they could buy a house. And to buy a house, they could actually give 3.5% as a deposit, not 50%. And then they would stretch out the loan term to up to 30 years. And what ended up happening then is lower and middle class families were then able to afford to buy a home, of course, with the bank's help. And those folks that are listening understand, then they advertised very much so this thing called the American Dream. And that American Dream was to, of course, incentivize the keep up with the Joneses theory, and to say that everybody should have a nice house with a picket fence, and everybody should have a nice, big, fancy car. And although most folks can't afford these things cash, that's okay. The banks are there to help you. We're going to require low deposits, and then we're going to stretch out the terms to make the monthly payments affordable. So the American Dream was awesome, and it spawned a lot of growth and a lot of inspiration for people to live better lives and all of those things. And don't forget that the banks aren't crazy. They're not silly. And so the banks created something called amortization. And amortization, we've always felt the brunt of as the borrower, because golly, don't we know that when we've taken out a 30-year mortgage loan and then we've begun making our mortgage payments on time every month like a good borrower, and boy, maybe 3, 4, 5 years go by, and you think, golly, I have paid a lot of money per month over the last few years into this mortgage, but yet my balance that I owe the bank has hardly gone down at all. And that's a pretty clever thing, amortization. The banks actually created these mortgage loans so that they could be paid most of their profits up front, and that each monthly payment that the borrower would make would hardly put a dent in the unpaid principal balance owed. And so, of course, folks, what I'm getting at here is that this was great for us as borrowers, and it allowed people to expand their lives, live better, be homeowners, have their own land, have their own privacy, a place for their dogs to play in the backyard. It's all good. But also, the banks aren't silly. The banks have constructed these loans in a way that also benefit them financially, and there's no doubt about it. So can you folks imagine being able to step into the bank's shoes, being able to collect monthly mortgage payments with interest without the headaches and liability of being a landlord, and maybe even utilize some compounding, folks? See, if you don't have to live off of the cash flow that comes in every month from owning one of these mortgage notes, you can take the cash flow that's coming in monthly and invest it as well. And so you get to enjoy this wonderful thing that the wealthy really like to utilize, which is compounding. Compound your money and have your money working for you, have your interest earning you interest. In fact, Albert Einstein once said that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He said, those who understand it earn it, and those who don't pay it. And so I'm just getting you folks that are listening here to understand one of the greatest investments there are is mortgage note investing. It's a wonderful vehicle. It's a great way to have security, good yield, and the cash flow that most folks don't understand how important it is. By way of compounding, folks, you can achieve a different level of wealth than you ever thought possible. And so we're going to discuss how this all works. We're going to discuss how you can monetize it and how you can add notes to your portfolio in just a moment, folks, right after this commercial break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.